Yesterday's 2024 Summer Series fixtures were predictably tight, but the headline was that Ireland avenged defeat by South Africa from the weekend before, as substitute Ciaran Frawley slotted 2 drop goals to give them a 1-point win at Kings Park Stadium. Joining us today, we have the perfect special guest to reflect on that game and the weekend's action, in former Springbok hooker Schalk Brits. The Summer Series, or England's Summer Series, is wrapped up. Our predictions for the weekend were spot on until they weren't. Ciaran Frawley had something to say about that. We got England, New Zealand right. We got Wales, Australia right. Chewy, did you call a last?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, if you say so, I'll have to listen back. But
go
on, Schalk.
Yeah, now that I know that he's gone against the Springboks, I thought my love towards him has decreased quite significantly.
To be honest, he gets so few predictions right on this podcast that his smugness means he's probably not even affected by that.
I considered that game to be blindingly obvious to call, and it panned out that way.
Okay, Chris, I hear you.
Well, spoiler alert for our special guest today, it's Schalk Brits. Schalk, how are you?
I'm actually phenomenal. I'm sitting at my desk and having a chat with two, or rather 3 beautiful gentlemen. And you can figure out. You can figure that out.
That was that equation.
My arithmetic is fairly rudimentary, Schalk, but just 3, 2. Okay, I get it.
To figure that out, Chewy.
There's one with a beard and one that's got glasses as well. He's not on my favorite list currently.
Chewy, you've got an hour to make up for it, but the knives are out. Sounds of things.
As I always say to Ebenezer there, forgive and forget.
I don't think he does a lot of that.
No, definitely not.
Go. Did you presumably you either watched live or you've caught up?
Yes, I mean, what was, I know you've covered probably last week, if I'm right, Ollie, but I mean, just these whole, for you guys, summer, for us, winter, internationals was phenomenal rugby. I mean, it was great to see. Well, let's take one step back. If I take with regards to England, so I know they played, like South Africa, a very conservative games plan during the World Cup. And for me, it was almost like both sides. What are they going to bring the next 4 years? And so in the first test, from a South African perspective, it was amazing to see that Tony Brown has brought in a different variations from attacking perspective. So playing the space, playing the options a bit more. I think we've reverted a bit too much back to, I think, our World Cup style in the second test match, but credit to Ireland and what Andy has done, the way he's analysed the Springboks fair play. Then I look at England and go, well, it is amazing going to New Zealand and pushing the All Blacks twice. And they could have won both. And for me, it is amazing. I think there's evolution happening there as well. I think Steve has got a great 4-year cycle with the team. And for me, I'm quite excited to see what they've got. Because, I mean, I was expecting, with all due respect, a bit more from New Zealand. But maybe the other side of the coin is looking at England and saying, look, they pushed the All Blacks in the home ground. Quite close both sides. So I'm quite excited for the next 4 years of rugby. If you take Wales and you take Australia, I mean, it's 2 sides that need to rebuild. And it's going to take a while for both of them. The quality of both games, if I use the All Blacks and England, and then you take South Africa and Ireland, unfortunately, the Welsh game and Australian game wasn't on the same level of intensity. But that's the reality. It is, they need to rebuild. They're not there.
So what you've just painted there is from the top 4 teams that were in action. Obviously, France were in action against Ireland, but they were fielding a second/third team.
Yeah.
So we won't talk about them too much. But it's a very positive outlook from a South African, Ireland, England, and New Zealand perspective. Yeah. I will zoom in on the drop goal and what happened there. But just before, guys, I found it, as an Englishman, I found it a really difficult series to weigh up because it was a very bittersweet feeling at the end. coming so close to beating the All Blacks on home soil for the first time in 30 odd years. How did you guys feel at the end of it?
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of that. I mean, but for a very sloppy third quarter, I thought England should have won that second test with a little bit to spare. But that just, that's almost a sort of makes the point. They played that well that, but for just 20 minutes of concentration, they would have won that, I think, quite comfortably. So that's frustrating. The Ireland series, well, we get round to the Ireland, the two matches. I wish there was a third test match this week. If ever a contest needed a third test, it was that one.
I would say, from England's perspective, I down the years, not quite in the same way, but I felt we'd sort of been there before. We've spoken about 2014 previously on this podcast. We've seen England be very, very competitive against New Zealand on multiple occasions. I mean, there are more occasions when they've been slightly less than competitive, but we've seen them get close to them. Often at Twickenham, or relatively often at Twickenham, occasionally down there. They couldn't have gone much closer actually on this occasion without winning the game. I have to say that, I mean, I read some extraordinary stuff attacking Maro Itoje for giving away 3 penalties on the trot or whatever it was deep in the game. Okay, he gave away 3 penalties on the trot. I mean, Schalk played with him. I mean, crikey, the guy pushes the envelope pretty much as far as it can go without disappearing off the table. So he's going to get caught every now and again. But his performance was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
And Schalk Barrett was pretty bloody good, actually, in a not terribly brilliant New Zealand performance up front. But Maro's contribution, I thought, was absolutely extraordinary. And you could see it in his eyes at the start. He recognised that this was not a once-in-a-lifetime game, but a once-in-a-really very not often sort of type of scenario where they could end the Eden Park thing. They could beat the All Blacks there for the first time in 30 years. It would be a massive feather in the cap. And I thought his performance was absolutely exceptional. And if nothing else had happened on Saturday, I would have been glad I'd been sitting in front of my television watching that, because I thought he was brilliant.
And he always turns up against New Zealand, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He always ramps it up against New Zealand.
And what a mess he made of their line-out. Crikey.
Well, I think they played a large part in messing up their own lineup. But yeah, I think he had a great game. And I think that they were both high-quality tests. But in the end, England couldn't close out in the final quarter of either game. Yeah. And their scrum is, and I know we'll come back to this, because Steve has targeted this as the area that they still manage, and Schalk knows all about this from the 2019 and onwards. They are not a top scrummaging side, and they haven't been a top scrummaging side probably for the last 8 years. They're not there. And Fletcher Newell, when he came on, made an awful mess of Bevan Rod. And again, it was, they were pressure points that all went New Zealand's way when they needed to. And this is, it's obviously a team that's, that's finding its way, having changed its style completely. And at the moment, they've still got serious flaws in their game. And for Steve Borthwick, who, I mean, look, he was Eddie Jones's assistant. He was forwards coach. He went to Leicester for 2 years. He's come back. That's 6 years as an England forwards coach. And that scrum has not come on at all. And to start saying now we need to find some tight heads. We needed to find some tight heads bloody 6 years ago or more. I mean, you're gonna keep on losing test matches. I'm sure that Schalk, you'll agree. You're going to keep on losing test matches if your front row is not good enough.
Actually, Nick, you're on such a high horse, you just disappeared off the top of my screen. Could you dismount and
can someone please just
on a very short pony, mate.
Can someone just please make sure that Nick's half glass is empty, because I mean you can't be more negative. If I may ask this following question, Nick, if And that is a good question. Is what was your expectation? Because surely if you go
I didn't think England would win the series, despite the fact that they had better preparation, probably going on a summer tour, than any England side that I can almost remember. And yeah, and with New Zealand in a state of flux and with a new coach, I thought that they definitely should have had a chance. They did have a chance, but they didn't close it out.
Well, my view, not that you've asked my viewpoint, but I'm going to give this the following to you, Nick. It is, for me, going with the coach that they've always wanted, right? They wanted this coach way back. Now he is there. It is, for me, what England did from a cultural perspective. Yes, they pushed New Zealand close both times, and they could have won. And I guess if there was a drop goal like Ireland did, then you would have probably said something different. You would have said, what an amazing performance by England. They won the test match. They won the first time in Eden Park and forever. And then the viewpoint might have changed. The one reality is apartheid is, in our viewpoint, is the cornerstone of any scrum. And you know that. And maybe the point is, who is the next guy in line? And are we is the focus enough on the tight heads? Because that is where your arrow starts. And if you don't get that arrow going forward, you're getting pummeled for almost every game. And one of the things we looked at while we at the Springboks is a basic KPI is how quickly you can take off the tight head. Because the probability of winning a match when the starting tight head goes off increases significantly the quicker he goes off. If you take 2019, for example, I don't want to go back too much back in that. Unfortunately, England lost their title within 3 minutes. Now to scrum against two packs for 78 minutes, that is a hard task. You're going to get pummeled. And the reality is, if you give away 7 to 8 penalties in a game for scrum, you will lose the game. You can have the best backline, but if you don't go forward in the scrum or you give penalties away, you are up for hunting all day long.
Nick,
I think we should also mention in all of this that the All Blacks needed a fairly extraordinary cameo from Beaten Barrett to get themselves. Yeah. I mean he shifted the game on its axis.
He was his own bomb squad.
Oh well,
yeah,
well, very, very well put. I mean, I can't remember. I mean, we've seen guys come off the bench and grab a winning try here and there, or have a decent impact on a game. But crikey, that was one hell of a substitute's performance, wasn't it?
Yeah. And actually, when you say it is rare, but Ciaran Frawley was almost the same. Not only did he bang the 2 drop goals over, he made the break and the long touch finder, which set up the position. He did a lot in 12 minutes or whatever it was. He was on the park.
Yeah.
But Schalk, Nick obviously raised the point of finishing out games. I mean, I suppose what we saw, and for me, I know we said that the 4 fixtures, the 2 England, New Zealands, and the 2 Ireland, South Africas, or other way around, if you want to go home teams, they were the highest quality fixtures, and I still saw a gap in quality between the South Africa Islands and New Zealand England. But also what we saw was South Africa able to close out the game in weekend 1, Ireland able to come back and bite back in weekend 2. And obviously we didn't see that finishing instinct from England. We didn't see it in the semi-final of Rugby World Cup 2023. We didn't see it in Super Saturday Six Nations against France. So do you think that's an edge that, the South African teams and the Ireland teams who have been there, done that, South Africa in particular, have over for the moment?
That is an extremely hard question, Ollie. And it comes down to actually belief. And I think one thing that I sort of said is, from a South African perspective during the World Cups, it wasn't about winning a rugby match or winning a trophy. It was actually about the bigger meaning. And what was the bigger meaning? Was giving hope to our country. We've got extremely high employment. We've got a high murder rate. So the point that we made is from a cultural perspective, we want to show, irrelevant of your race, of your background, of your religious beliefs, we can work together. So the aim of the World Cup was actually giving hope. Now, I don't know. The question is maybe posed to you guys is what is England's bigger motive? What are they actually? Is it just about winning a rugby match, or is it actually winning what's the bigger cause? What's the why? And so from my perspective, no disrespect to anyone listening to this, is what is England's why? And for me, it would be easy. Go back to what makes me strong. I mean, England has always had an extremely great pack. They had a great 9 and 10. And so if I go back to 03, they dominated down south. They came back. I don't know, understood their why, but from my perspective, I would say, I want to smash everyone because I dominated the world. And this sounds probably horrendous, but England took over the world. So I'm a force to be reckoned with. And yes, and the reality is England isn't liked by a lot of the countries, but take almost pride in that and say, well, I'll dominate a game from a rugby perspective.
I think you make a great point there, Schalk. And I never really got it at the time in 2000 to 2003. Woodward made a great thing of, we want to be the #1 team in the world. And I thought, well, does it really matter if you're the #1 as long as you win the World Cup? But actually, that was the why. The why for the England under Woodward, and it took a long time, was to become the #1 team in the world, to go down to New Zealand and beat New Zealand in New Zealand, to beat Australia in Australia, which I don't think they'd done at the time. So there was a why for Woodward's England all the time.
And there was also a huge emphasis on producing not just good international players, but world-class international players. And that was Woodward's, that was his modus operandi. That's where he set the bar. And it's very interesting. If you listen to the talk from most England coaches subsequent to that, they're not setting the bar that high. Theirs is more based on a sort of, we want to be good, and primarily we want to survive.
I was fascinated listening to Schalk's comments there, because I've not really thought about it in this way before he spoke, but that you often see the truth of a side in their eyes in defeat. And we've seen it twice for South Africa recently, once in the Cricket World Cup and against India in the final there. And once on Saturday where that game was as near to an absolute must-win game as you could possibly get. And that's because the culture of South African sport at the moment seems to me, in quite tough times, it's bigger than the game itself. You've identified 100%. Reasons why these things are worth winning. And if they're worth winning enough, when you don't win, it really, really hurts. And I looked at the England faces on Saturday, and yes, they were disappointed. You could see disappointment all over the place. But I thought the South African levels of disappointment in those near misses recently, looking back now, in light of what you've said, are on a slightly different level. They run deeper somehow.
Chris, if you look or just listen to Sia's words afterwards, he apologized to the whole country for letting them down. And that is where he takes ownership and say, look, we didn't perform, we weren't on it. And we lost by a drop goal, but he takes it so personally because this is not about just winning a rugby match. It's about giving hope. And it hasn't, you don't have to say everyone's why has to be the same. England needs to find their own why. And so Ireland is, for me, it's actually, if you look at Ireland, it is, I do not understand their why because it hasn't been explained to me. But from that perspective, I look at Ireland and say, like, they've got a very small rugby base. It is probably the third or fourth favorite country in the sport in the country. They've got a very small player base. And they probably say, I'll show the world that with a very small base as Irish, we'll show you we can perform. So that is quite amazing. And so I'm laboring the point, but it all comes down to why. If you just want to win a rugby match, the personal effect is not as badly felt if your why isn't defined before you start in any test match or any game.
What
or
was the
any World Cup.
Saracens why, Schalk?
That's a great question, Brendan. So
That's the first time ever.
Yeah, it is,
so,
Brendan, the first time ever. Well done.
So I would say, I mean, for people listening to this, our why was making memories, right? And I'll tell you why it was that, because most of the things in previous environments that I've been involved with, they treat you mean to keep you keen. And so it's not a place where you get respect, you earn it over time. And we said it from a different perspective. We're going to give you respect. It's for you to keep it, because it's a lot harder, and we're going to treat you unbelievably well. And so our system and our why was, we want to change the way people treat rugby players. Coaches treat rugby players. You're not just a commodity that you can sell when you go off the market. You are a human being first, and we want to raise good humans. And secondly, we want to make memories. And thirdly, we want to show that our way is the right way. So from that perspective, Brendan, it changed the whole viewpoint, how we see losses. And they brought in Matthew Saeed, that wrote the book 10,000 Hours or Bounce. Then we brought him in Black Box Thinking, because we were that team that lost twice in a row in a Heineken semi-final and a Premiership final. But that didn't define us. That just made us believe that we got close, and we want to show that this is the way to treat people.
Yeah, interesting.
This is sort of speculation, but it's certainly based on past evidence. Obviously, Sear apologized to a nation, and New Zealand say they'd lost on Saturday. I think you probably have a similar level of, maybe not apology from Schalk Barrett, but potential backlash to be anticipated. What do you think the correlation is, Schalk, between that New Zealand backlash and their why?
I don't know. From a New Zealand perspective, in terms that I've played there, it is extremely personal. For example, I would say if you lose in New Zealand or South Africa, it is on every back page and it's 3 pages deep. Where in England, you make the 4th or 5th page, and that's the reality. And so it is a sport that New Zealanders are extremely proud of. It's a sport that South Africans are extremely proud of. And so from that perspective, it means so much more to the public. Yes, it means a lot to people that love rugby in England, but you crack on, you move on, and you watch the football on Sunday or Saturday, whatever. It's just a different viewpoint. There's so much more interest. I mean, if you look at the numbers of people watching the game from a percentage perspective, South Africans watch a lot of rugby. Then they watch Currie Cup, then they watch URC, and then they watch international rugby. It is actually ridiculous. It's great. It's fantastic.
I think it's true that in England, the sport that is emblematic of the nation is not rugby. I mean, it's patently football.
Yeah.
Where the sort of broad public investment, I know it was a final at the weekend and stands it aside, but the public investment into that 90 minutes in Berlin was absolutely huge.
Yeah,
vast. I mean, you're right about the media treatment of the games, etc., etc., etc. I mean, in 2003, when England won that World Cup, the imaginations were caught, just as they were caught in 2005 when England won the Ashes. And it's for the governing bodies then to get hold of this and say, this is something we need to bottle, because it ain't going to come along too often here. We need to make the most of this. And you could argue that they didn't in both sports, actually. But I do think that the look in the South African eyes on Saturday in what was a tour match, or a mid World Cup cycle tour match, important though it was, the look in their eyes was crushing disappointment. Looking back, that really, and that explained Peter Steph du Toit's reaction at the final whistle when they were wondering what had happened to Colby when he, ran into that guy in the lead up to the drop goal and all that stuff. It was just massive disappointment, and that's impressive. I'm not denigrating South African rugby at all by saying this. Quite the opposite. It was a very impressive reaction because it meant so much.
Chris, just on rugby itself, for me, that is, rugby is a sport that I want my boys to play. Why? It's because it's the values is teach your kids. You don't moan at authority. You don't moan at the ref. You treat him with respect. You treat the opposition with respect. You try to kick the guy or dominate the guy for 80 minutes. But then afterwards, you shake his hand and you say, thank you, I'll meet you next time we play. Either you won or you lost that particular battle. And for me, it is such an unbelievable sport to get involved with. And that's why it's quite weird. I know there's a lot of more money in football, but if I say to my kids, what sport from a value perspective I want to teach my kids, that is rugby. That is the camaraderie you get within a team, how you build a work ethic, what kind of discipline you need to succeed. And then on the last part is the value system. For me, that is just something so unique to rugby. And it's a sport where everyone can play. A thin guy, a big guy, a short guy, a tall guy. And that's the beauty. And that's probably, the disclaimer here is, I am biased towards rugby because of those value systems.
Well, I mean, we're looking at a period where, particularly in the UK, outside Ireland at the moment, the game is not in a good place, and the sort of things that you've talked about in terms of what's your motivation, where are you, what are you looking to achieve? I don't think that England has been very good at that at all in the last, since that World Cup. That's a massive wasted opportunity. And I never thought at the time, sitting, in the aftermath of that win in Sydney, I did not think that I would not see another England team win the World Cup in the intervening, 20 odd years. So I think we have lost our way, and it's very interesting, when you talk about the way in which Clive Woodward, in particular, set his goals. One of them was he set them on South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. He made, his main aim. He didn't care as much about the Six Nations as he did about beating those three teams. And obviously, the record spoke a huge amount for him, that he succeeded in achieving that for the most part. So England do have to find themselves again, because the game is losing traction here, and the shop window is incredibly important. So this team becoming successful and actually winning something is very important to the future of the game. Certainly in the UK, very, very important indeed. And so they have a huge amount to do.
Schalk,
and we do have a new Secretary of State for media, for culture, media, and sport, whose constituency is Wigan, and who talks an awful lot about rugby league. Does she not, Lisa Nandy? A lot.
I can't believe I let myself get interrupted for that addition to the podcast. Schalk, can I ask you, going back to the sort of weight of expectation in South Africa, we've spoken quite a lot in this podcast about, and South Africa were, I can't remember whose now, but several of our favourites pre-Rugby World Cup 2023, even though obviously in the 4-year cycle in between, there had been several high-profile defeats and things like that. How then does an expectant nation handle that? Because obviously Nienaber and Rassie, or Rassie then Nienaber and then Rassie again, have operated on it's every 4 years that counts.
So it is actually communication. It is when a team, and I can remember the meeting, and for me it was, and most of us, you want to win every rugby match that's out there, especially in the Springbok shirt. And no one goes into a rugby match to lose a game. But he helped us, and to a certain extent, the players and everyone is conveying the same message. And the question was posed in one of the meetings, do you want to win? Well, let me go back to it. Guys, can you remember in 2008, who was the #1 side in the world? Can you remember who was the number one side in 2014? And even as a player, I could not remember. And I mean, most people guess New Zealand. And it says, that is irrelevant what the answer is. Nobody remembers who is the number one side in between World Cups. You can tell me who's in 03 or won. England won 07 and it was South Africa. Then you go New Zealand back to back, and then you go South Africa back to back. So the point is here is people remember the World Cups. That is where the interest is. And so from our perspective, is we looking at growing a squad over that 4-year cycle to compete at a World Cup and win the World Cup. How do you do that? You get enough caps during that 4-year cycle to make sure that your team depth is big enough. So we knew at some of the games we might struggle. We would rotate certain guys within the squad to make sure that Amani Libbok gets enough game time to be firing at a World Cup. If he, let's say Andrew Pollock is injured, that he did during the World Cup or pre-World Cup, that there would be someone else. So that is firstly making sure the message is correct, and lastly, it is World Cups that matters. And so from that perspective, if you've got the buy-in of a squad and you've got the buy-in, and I won't say we've got the buy-in in total from a nation perspective, and like this weekend and the Welsh game, Rassie completely rotated the squad, and predicted he's going to rotate the squad for this weekend totally as well. But it is sort of giving the younger guys exposure over time. And I think going back with Andy Farrell, it was a very hard task for him because they went on a 17-game run. He didn't rotate the squad. No rugby player or no person can perform at that level consistently over such a long period. And some or other time you run out of steam. And it's not the whole squad that needs to run out of steam. The probability of winning a match if 2 players play badly is small. When it's becoming to 3, then you have a problem, and that we work that out. If you only need 3 guys to play badly on a particular day, and the probability of losing increases significantly. So once again, this year and the next 3 years, Rassie will rotate the squad. He will get the senior guys to give the younger guys more experience and more time, because we don't know if the squad will be there. But the one thing that is consistent over time from 03, 07, 12, 15, 19, 23 years, your depth caps-wise makes a massive difference to the success of your squad. Maybe that is just one thing that is lacking with England. If I look at 03, how experienced that England squad was, how long they played together, they just understood each other, and they had a belief that was built over time that they can beat anyone. And that eventually, when you win those tight games, you just don't even think about losing, because you always think you'll find a way to make it work. Yes. And you can't put that on paper. You can't. It's just a feeling.
No.
So it's go on, Nick.
I was going to say there's something intriguing about this, Schalk, because I was reading something that the South Africa under-20s, who for most nations are a register of what's coming, I don't know how great a register, but at least some indicator, weather vane, of what's coming through. And their record in the under-20 championship is actually not very good. Judge, from
100%
achievements, certainly at senior international level. And I just wondered about that, because it was a New Zealander who was actually writing about it and having chipping away at some of South Africa's reputation, if you like. And is that a concern, do you think, or is it a question of the fact that they may not be there at when they're 19 or 20, but in the intervening years, if there's anybody with any talent or great talent, they will be picked up and that will be honed and sharpened?
I think this is going to be extremely controversial, that I might say, is you've got one of the best schooling leagues rugby-wise worldwide, with the amount of rugby players playing. The standard with the schools has been phenomenal. When it comes to selection and picking of players, there's certain targets that needs to be hit during those things. So it's maybe not always the best players that are picked, but it's right for growth within certain sectors that is important. The big
And the
thing
other
is make.
sorry, go on.
So that is from a transformation perspective, certain numbers needs to be hit. Now, maybe some of the players aren't experienced enough, or there is not the right coaches or structures in place, but it isn't always the best players that play in there. But eventually, over the long term, if you look at it, those players might become better over time, and they become the next Sia or the next Cheslin or the next whoever that might be, or the next Peter Steph de Toy. That is just the reality.
And the under-20s is an odd tournament, and I wrote about this a couple of months ago. Take France. France often put in an under-19 team rather than under-20 team before the last couple of years, and probably their greatest ever year in terms of the talent that came through was when was DuPont's year, but they only came 9th that year because they got beaten in a very narrowly in 2 pool matches and went down into the playoffs. They had Jelinek, they had DuPont, they had Penno, they had about 6 other internationals, they had Mavaka. All of them were in that year. They were all playing a year young to the others, and they didn't perform as an under-20 team. But the system was in place to pick out the talent, and they were all playing top 14 rugby 6 months later. That's the point. They were all.
Brendan, yeah. So what is currently going for us as South Africans? So you've got unbelievable. The URC is bringing a lot of young players through. Our most experienced players, because that is a very experienced and expensive players. Our assets is playing abroad. What are they doing abroad? They are gaining experience. They're adding to their places where they play. They play good rugby. Then they come back and bring that IP. So they gain different skill sets playing abroad and for different teams and seeing different structures. And like, for example, Jacques, he's understanding how the Irish work. Now you go, then you bring back into the South African fold. You've got guys that play in France, Japan, England, Wales, Ireland, name it. They come back, give an RP to our team, and yet with the local players, we've got a very great base for developing them because they're playing for the Stormers, the Bulls, the Sharks, and the Lions and the Bulls. I said Bulls. So they get experience playing there as well. So it's sort of a double whammy of players getting experience all over the world. And that makes a massive difference.
Is there something, Schalk, in the argument that says that the way the diaspora of South African players has happened, and you were a part of it, you spent a good chunk of time at Saracens, but that's in the Premiership, which is a grind. I mean, that's a pretty heavy-duty tournament.
Yeah.
The top 14 is, if anything, a bigger grind. But the URC, because of travelling, the frontline players playing URC rugby very often don't come up here. They might play the majority of their URC rugby on home soil and then don't make the flight. And you've got another chunk of people in Japan, and I'm not trying to disparage the Japanese competition at all, but it may be a fair bit lighter on the body, all things considered, than a full season slogging it out through the top 14. So is it the case that South African players are just a little bit fresher, less beaten up, which is a strange thing to say about South African rugby, given the way you play it? But it's is there anything in that argument at all that actually the current system is working for you in terms of a player welfare and player protection from that perspective?
I would say the guys that's actually in Japan mostly has made it already. They paid their school fees.
Sure.
And so they are prolonging their careers for whatever reason in Japan. But the reality is, well, if you look at the URC and you look at the Premiership, that is a great place to learn new skills and craft your. If you take Franco, that he played for Gloucester. If you take Andres, Jesse played somewhere else. So who else is there? That is Kwacha. Kwacha, well, he didn't play in Europe. But the point that I'm trying to make, well, I can't remember all the names now, but they have had experience, most of them, in the Northern Hemisphere. And the reality is it is a hard graft. And the reason why some of the players don't travel north is because of travel. And secondly, it's sometimes you compete on the championship level and you compete in the domestic league. If you don't get on the top 6, you're not playing championship rugby. And that's what the French has been doing for years. They have a proper go for 2 or 3 matches. If they see they're not going to make it, they pull back the whole squad, and then they put the second stringers in. It's not something unique to South Africa. The French have been doing it for years.
Indeed.
Because the problem is, if you top 14, if you're at the bottom 2, bottom 3, you playing second division, the 12, what's it called? If you don't stay up, and that's just the reality. And now that England don't have it anymore, it's a bit different. And with all due respect, pre-URC, I mean, the amount of games Sexton played, competitive rugby was extremely well managed. The Irish has always managed their players that they are extremely fresh.
Oh yeah.
When it comes to international rugby, and I always felt like the poor England players and guys that's playing in England, they're getting smashed week in and week out, and it's a freaking hard tournament because there's always the expectation that every team needs to win every weekend, and the rotation wasn't always as applicable in England than it was in France or in the old URC. I can't remember what that was called.
Spot on. I mean, we've seen exactly that with Maro Itoje, who, Schalk, I don't know if you know this, but there was I suppose it's only a guideline and not an imposed limit, given that we discussed it and nothing happened, but there's a 2,400 minute limit, on players' participation, both Gallagher Premiership or all domestic rugby and international inclusive. Maro breached that in the first test of England-New Zealand, and we speculated on the podcast, would he have to come off 9 minutes in or 20 minutes in or however many it was? Not only did he play a full test that day, he's then gone and played one more. So I think there's a lot of talk in the direction of player welfare, but I think you're absolutely right in that Maro is a great example of someone who, yes, he put in a hell of a shift on Saturday, but that's only at the end of a very long and grueling. I mean, he deserves a lot of credit for it, obviously, but you compare it to someone like James Lowe, who's played something like 2 URC Leinster games this season. Obviously, different players, different roles, but those two microcosms pretty much encapsulate it, don't you think?
Yeah. The one thing that I would say is there must be, okay, firstly, that is maybe you can last one season like that. But unfortunately, it's a compounding effect over multiple seasons that leads to huge injuries. And you don't really want them to miss any games. So from that perspective, any games meaning the games that matters. So from that perspective, you go, okay, fine. How do we manage them better? And I think the communication between club and province needs to be, or the head coach of the international side needs to be managed better, because in reality, you want your best players playing international rugby and the important games when it comes to premiership. But there is a pressure. And unfortunately, if he plays too long, give him an extra 2 weeks off and say, fine, you've played so many minutes. There must be a reward or there must be a consequence, not necessarily financially or from that perspective, I guess, because there's a big upside playing international rugby because you get paid well for that as well. But there must be an upside when it comes to welfare, saying, look, you've done we played too many games this specific season. We want you to take an extra week or extra 2 weeks off. Or there must be an alternative when something like that happens, that you don't get that compounding effect.
I mean, how did you find looking back at your Saracens, your time at Saracens and what the club achieved during that time? You were pitching for Premiership titles and European Cup titles, certainly in 4 of the seasons, 5 of the seasons that you were there, something like that. So you were, you were pitching on both levels at the top. Your international call-ups at that time were perhaps not constant, but were still involved. And just give us some idea of those demands, because Saracens won, two, I think it was 2 European and Heineken Cup doubles. That's in terms of achievement, where do you put that in your career, and how difficult?
Nick, funny enough, the games don't matter now. Championships don't matter. It's a great add-on. But the things I remember is the trips to Miami, to Verbia, going back and training, going on a Munich beer festival with my mates. And it wasn't my colleagues, it wasn't my teammates, it was my friends. And that I remember, what I would remember that, and I can remember those days a lot more vividly than any rugby match. Yes.
Even after the beer festival?
No, well, I couldn't remember much of the beer festival, that's for sure. But I mean, I can remember, like, for example, I'm not mentioning names, that we flew in the morning, we trained on the Tuesday, and we flew out on a Wednesday or the Thursday. We flew back the evening, but 2 o'clock in the evening or the next morning. But some of the guys didn't make the flights. And so there is so many things. And I can remember they taking us on a ski trip to Verbia, where we do toboggan the first day and we skied for 2-3 other days. And it's just things that you shouldn't be doing, you do. And that's the things I remember from my rugby career. And a lot of times, and I think this is life as well, you always aim to get to a certain team or win a certain cup, but you forget the journey. The journey is the fun part. That's a tough part where you build character and you build a better you. But the big point is, forget about the targets, work on the processes, and that was our thing. We were process-driven, not results-driven, and enjoy the journey, because before you know it, it's done. But
well,
if you say...
I have to say, Schalk, that from the outside, from a journalistic perspective, whenever, and you know, I'm not in the thick of it now as I was when you were at Saracens, for example, but every time you go to St Albans on a press day, the atmosphere in that clubhouse and those surroundings was unique, in my experience. It was incredibly, not light-hearted. It was a serious place, but there was a lightness about it, which you didn't always encounter in other clubs. And, you know, I had visions of everyone standing around listening to Steve Borthwick tell jokes. I've just made that up. It was, but there was a whole, I thought there was a close-knit togetherness about the Saracens squad, season on season on season on season, that I didn't see anywhere. I didn't sense that anywhere else, not to that level.
It is, Chris, it came down to, once again, it wasn't results driven. It is the way you respected each other. Literally the guy that cleans the shirts was just important as a CEO, and the players just important as the coach, and the coach is just important as the physios. Everyone had their place, and we didn't judge people by what number was on their shirt or what the salary they earned. It is the person you are. And so from that perspective, it was the enjoyment factor, the amount of laughing we did at these team meetings was hilarious. I mean, I've not laughed as much as in those team meetings at anywhere else. I mean, it was just a phenomenal time of my life, and it was a precious time. But it was amazing that when you take away the results and you only focus on the process, and let me tell you this story. So the importance of rugby, I learned very quickly. So we played against Leinster. It was 2010. We prepped for a whole 10 days in rugby terms just for this game. And we analyzed them from death. We had a guy that analyzed not just where they kick and how many lineups that. We got a quant guy to work out what the best probability will be, what play to play where's the weaknesses. So we went in depth, and we had a quant guy for that whole season, and that's why we kicked so much as well. But then we went in and we got not thumped, but we lost badly against the Tigers. They were just a great outfit. And I can remember, like most mornings after a rugby match, you can remember you get into the change room, everyone's a bit low and a bit upset about the weekend after the game. The beer just doesn't taste so nice. And we got Monday morning, we went into this particular meeting, and actually Brendan Fenter, the doctor, was standing in the front. And he was looking at everyone and he says, "What's wrong with you guys?" And we're like, "We just lost." He says, "Boys, I don't understand it. He said, we lost against the better side. We did everything we could. They were just better than us. The one thing that I can tell you, why are you upset? The reference to this game is nothing. The importance of this game is nothing. Why? Because I've got a kid that's got cancer in my thing, and I have to tell that father that his son will probably not make the summer. I've got a guy that lost a wife. So you can moan and about your little game of 80 minutes. That is not life. That is not reality. Reality is when you have to say that following things. So I'm going to say again, we lost against Tigers. We did everything from a prep perspective. Yes, we're going to have a look at what we did wrong. And you know what? If you play against the best side, and they were currently at that time, they were the best side, let's learn from them. What can we do better to, when we play them again, get the scoreboard a bit closer? Let's steal what they do. Let's use it to our advantage, and let's go again. So I do not ever want you to moan about losing a rugby match. And to the importance of life, it's nothing.
100%. 100%. Very well put. Guys, I know I promised Schalk that we'd be wrapped up in about 5 minutes or so. I just want to talk about the elephant in the room, which hasn't been mentioned from Saturday, which was the Cheslin Colby, Caelan Doris incident. And Schalk, I wanted to get your thoughts first on that, whether you thought it was foul play, well, South African foul play or Ireland foul play, or just a rugby incident, or what did you make of it and the decision?
Well, the focus is we didn't win. We didn't win. That's fine. So the question I was going on that particular event, he could have changed lanes and Cheslin could have not fallen over. He maybe did change lanes. It doesn't really matter. We lost. And so from that perspective, you can debate the issue at hand. And I think as pundits or people commentating about him, you talk about what could have happened. It didn't happen. Fair play to Ireland. They played, I'll rather look at the way they, like Andy would play the double inside ball. Played the double inside ball the previous week, then they played a single inside ball. They scored with both of these moves that was preset. I would rather say it's okay, fine. When our bomb squad couldn't perform like it did, why not? We got a couple of injuries. What are we going to do next time when we play Ireland? Or the next team when we can't use our bomb squad like we want to use? Where can we rather improve from? Because then it is a positive way of looking at that particular match and saying, okay, when we've got this, what do we have to do next time? Because that's a solution-based to that particular point. And Rassie, the way he looks at it, he doesn't look at a particular thing. He looks at trends within a game. He says, where did we lose momentum? Where did we gain momentum? What was it? Individual errors? Fine, no problem. That is just people make mistakes. People drop a ball. But where did we strategically lose this game? And I don't know what he would say. From my perspective, is like when we kicked on James, yes, the first test match, it wasn't that great. The second test match, he was phenomenal in the air. Maybe we should have changed strategy and kick a cross kick and not keep on kicking on him. We've got great outside backs, but not the tallest outside backs. Was the kick a little bit too far? Because how we measure kicking stats, because they measure kicking meters versus running meters. What's the probability of winning? Was the kick too far? Things that he will look at. He wouldn't even focus on that particular issue.
I mean, one of the great issues that comes out of, sporting contests like that is the, the moments that people produce. And Ciaran Frawley's 2 drop goals are just out of the ether almost. And Osborne, a young guy, who's mainly played at centre. I mean, I thought that his performance at fullback was pretty phenomenal. I mean, I don't
both matches.
Don't think he dropped a high ball.
No, yeah, they haven't missed Keenan as much as we thought they would, which is obviously, no discredit to Keenan's role in that Ireland side, but Osborne has taken to 15 like a duck to water.
They've come out with a few more options, haven't they? Farrell's come out with a couple of options. Means that Schalk rightly pointed out earlier that he's been quite conservative in selection. He's stuck with players. He hasn't run the changes. He hasn't sort of broadened the base of his international experience in the way that some other coaches might. And I think Ty Furlong's on the way down now. I'm not sure he's the player he was. I think Omani is pretty much on his last legs internationally. I don't expect to see so very much more from him, but he has brought in a couple of bit. How long's Conor Murray going to last? But I mean, they won this game without their form player as well. They squared that series without Gibson Park, which I think maybe quite a lot of people didn't think they would do. So I think Farrell, in his quite conservative way in this sense, has come out with his nose ahead.
Yeah.
Before we let the moment pass, I know what you're getting to, your question originally, Ollie. I do think we do sort of have to address that crocodile roll. I mean, we've argued very strongly on this pod ever since we started that it's an obscenity. It shouldn't be in the game. I always thought it was illegal anyway. It's dangerous play. It's also playing when you're on the ground. And for a while, back in the Premiership, it was an automatic yellow. And then they seem to just cave in on it. So it is now formally an offence. I thought Ireland, and I think they were deserving winners, but Ireland got lucky there. That could have been a double yellow very easily, or it could have been a red for Doris. So they got away with one there. And I think that needs to be acknowledged to our South African listeners, because we're pretty quick the other way around. And I'd also just add that Cheslin Colby's he's a fascinating, spiky character. He upset me a little bit. I thought that was a bit of a Hollywood right at the end when they did the drop goal, and he made no attempt. I don't think Caelan Doris moved. His eyes might have moved, but I don't think he did. But it goes back to what Schalk was telling us. The desperation, the disappointment, the feeling of letting the country down if they lost, that was born of that. Is there, even at the last second, and it was the last second, is there any way we can salvage this match? Is there any way that could be perceived as obstruction? So that's how I read that, those incidents. And it doesn't detract from who were the worthy winners on the night, because that was a sensational finish from Ireland. That was a historically memorable finish that we'll be talking about in 30 years' time.
Those with Irish links are always very generous in victory, Schalk. Very generous.
I must say, I gave the Irish a lot of grief pre-World Cup, and I predicted that they won't make they won't get a semi. And the amount of abuse I got when they went on the streak, and then afterwards they went quite quiet. I mean, it is amazing that you've got a nation supporting a team like that. It is just the singing, the support, I would say, was quite phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, they're not in action. Obviously, no repeat fixture for South Africa and Ireland. How big would a decider be? So we're going to have to wait for the next chapter in that little rivalry. South Africa are playing Portugal this weekend, and there are a couple of other, admittedly slightly less headline fixtures. But we can all look forward to that, and we'll have a chat about that next week. Schalk, hugely appreciate your time. Particularly, I didn't know you'd be in the office, but thank you for squeezing us in. Massively appreciate it. And yeah, stay in touch, because we'd love to have you on again further down the line.
James, thank you for listening to my stories, and keep on doing what you're doing. It's great. And to all the listeners out there, enjoy it, and life is short, so live it. And you don't always appreciate what you have, because we always look at what we will want to have. Anyway.
Thank you, Schalk. We're all off to the beer festival. Thank you very much.
Enjoy. Bye, guys.
Cheers, Schalk.
Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Rugby Paper podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use, and recommend the show to your friends. The Rugby Paper is available to buy every Sunday, and to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe to our print, digital and online options at therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions. That's therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions to get all our content for as little as 14p per day.